The presentation of Anarchism as social philosophy which aims at the emancipation, economic, social, political, and spiritual of the human race. The emancipation.
Anarchist Essays is brought to you by Loughborough University's Anarchism Research Group. For more information on the ARG, see the link in the show notes or follow us on Twitter at ARGLBORO.
Welcome to today's episode. I'm Vincent Bouchard.
And I'm Asia Matthews.
And we are both mathematics professors in Canada. Today we're going to explore how undergraduate mathematics education in North America reflects hierarchical structures and how anarchist principles might offer a path toward a more equitable and human-centered approach.
So if you're more familiar with radical politics or historical movements or literary experiments than you are with calculus and linear algebra, that's okay. Today we're not teaching math. Instead, we're thinking about how it's taught and why it matters.
All right, so let's start with a bit of context. There are many issues with the way we teach math at the undergraduate level. We think that the way it is currently taught is cognitively dissonant. What we proclaim and what we do are not consistent. So let me try to explain. So we want our students to learn mathematical reasoning skills such as abstraction, problem solving, rigor, logical thinking, and collaboration, but we focus our teaching almost exclusively on mathematical content. We proclaim great importance to equity, diversity, and inclusion, yet we teach math in a very hierarchical way. We believe that the mathematical process is as important as the answer, yet we design our courses based on learning outcomes rather than processes. We value math as a way of thinking and approaching the world, yet our courses often have low averages and high failure rates, furthering the deeply ingrained fear of mathematics in our society. We see math as a creative endeavor, yet we mostly teach algorithmic procedures. And we experience strong emotions when we see a beautiful mathematical argument, yet we teach math content mostly as a dry, hard, disconnected subject. We could go on and on.
So this is where we want to bring anarchist principles into the conversation. But what do we mean by anarchism? So our focus is on contemporary anarchism, as synthesized in Yuri Gordon's book, Anarchy Alive, Anti-Authoritarian Politics from Practice to Theory. Contemporary anarchism centers around three main tenets. So the first is a constant challenge and resistance to all forms of domination. The second is prefigurative politics, in which all decisions are made in a manner that is consistent with a set of non-hierarchical values, such as equality, decentralization, and voluntary cooperation. The third principle is a focus on diversity and open-endedness. So at its core, anarchism aims at aligning thoughts and actions. And we argue that it provides a philosophical framework to address this perceived cognitive dissonance in the way that we currently teach university mathematics.
In fact, anarchist principles resonate with mathematics itself. The process of mathematical reasoning, exploring conjectures, collaborating, questioning, proving, is non-hierarchical, as it rejects power structures and relies on deductive reasoning as the ultimate authority. Mathematics is also open-ended, with a focus on diversity of approaches. As Cantor, a famous mathematician, said, "The essence of mathematics lies in its freedom." Ultimately, one could argue that the mathematical research process is inherently anarchist. So why not use anarchism as a framework to rethink how we teach math?
In this direction, Daniel Reinholz's recent book, Equitable and Engaging Mathematics Teaching, which was published in 2023, examines how hierarchies are embedded in mathematics classrooms. He argues that traditional practices like curriculum sequencing, evaluation, classroom participation often reinforce inequity, with some students dominating discussion and others being marginalized. I know that I've experienced that, and I expect many of us have. So Reinholz draws attention to the power of social discourses in shaping who is seen as mathematically capable and who is not.
In other words, math isn't neutral. While the mathematical research process may be anarchist, It is done by humans, and some aspects of mathematical practice and education are permeated with hierarchies and power relationships. Math is done and thought in a social space where authority, gendered behaviors, rationalized assumptions, and ableist perspectives influence learning. Reinholz calls for approaches that challenge these hierarchies, making the classroom a more inclusive and equitable space. We continue in this direction and use anarchism as a framework to think how we can improve math education.
Actually, it's important to note that we, Vincent and I, do not pretend to propose an anarchist blueprint for university math. There is no blueprint of what an anarchist society should look like. In fact, that having a pre-designed plan would be implicitly hierarchical and would run against the idea of prefigurative politics. So instead, in our paper, we offer some thoughts on university mathematics education just from these three anarchist principles, and we investigate how each of them can be applied. So in fact, many of the things that we discuss are not specific to math education, and they may apply to university education in general.
Okay, so the first anarchist tenet is resistance to domination. In math education, domination shows up in multiple ways: the teacher-student hierarchy, the perceived authority of expert knowledge, and classroom dynamics, where some students dominate discussions due to socialized behaviors. The aim is to challenge power structures to reorganize the classroom in a more horizontal way.
In 1971, Richard Skemp wrote about the challenge for instructors in the mathematics classroom to hold two simultaneous forms of authority. So there's the authority, which is the expert, but then there's also the authority of the classroom disciplinarian. And mathematics is different from other disciplines because truth in mathematics relies on deductive reasoning rather than on sufficient evidence. This form of truth cannot be contradicted by any authority. In this light, the teacher and the student are on equal footing, assuming both are capable of rational deductive thinking. On the other hand, the teacher in the contemporary classroom is also responsible for many forms of social interaction in the classroom, including orchestrating collaboration and communication. This activity can be fraught with hierarchical power imbalances, but there are many ways that we can challenge power structures within the classroom. So this might look like dialogue-based learning, where instructors guide but do not dictate, and where students are encouraged to question assumptions and explore ideas collectively. Other ideas might involve restructuring participation, ensuring all voices are heard, and actively challenging stereotypes about who is naturally good at math.
To challenge power structures, we can also think about reorganizing the curriculum and courses themselves. Traditional lectures, which reinforce the teacher-student hierarchy, may be replaced with problem-based courses, or inquiry-based learning, or even open-ended projects. In fact, new courses that emphasize students' independence and creativity instead of solely mathematical knowledge, such as first-year modeling courses where students have autonomy over how they approach and how they even choose problems, may help create a horizontal learning environment. Even small changes, like facilitating inclusive group work, can shift the classroom from a top-down structure to a more horizontal one.
So the second tenet is prefigurative politics, aligning thoughts and actions. We would like to organize learning in a way that mirrors the non-hierarchical society that we wish to see. When applied to university mathematics education, aligning thoughts and actions also means that we should teach math in a way that is consistent with what we are trying to achieve, thus addressing the cognitive dissonances that plague our curriculum. This leads in many intriguing directions.
For example, if we really value mathematical reasoning skills, prefigurative politics invite us to orient our teaching to focus on these skills every step of the way. So instead of teaching content and thinking of the skills as byproducts, we should align thoughts and actions and teach the skills directly. But where does that lead us? Well, what if, instead of teaching content such as calculus, linear algebra, differential equations, we organized our courses around mathematical reasoning skills, such as abstracting, problem solving, researching, writing proofs, using formalism, thinking logically, and so on and so forth? What would an Abstraction 101 course look like? Now, as a mathematician, this is really fun to think about this. It would be actually awesome to teach a course like Abstraction 101. It could take could lead us in so many different directions.
Absolutely. So another aspect of university education that is challenged by prefigured politics is the authority of the teacher as the designer of the precise path that the learner should take. From an anarchist perspective, students should contribute to course design. Maybe they choose which problems or questions to focus on, or they set goals for their own learning. Instead of a strictly linear curriculum dictated by the department, students and instructors could co-construct learning pathways. We could envision much more flexible programs that take into account the fact that students progress at different paces and they reach different levels of understanding.
The authority of the teacher as sole evaluator of knowledge is also challenged by prefigurative politics. At the end of a university course, the instructor assigns a grade that is supposed to represent the student's level of understanding. But grade assignment is an obvious hierarchical structure. Traditional exams and grades centralize authority. There are alternatives: student portfolios, collaborative assessments, self-reflections, mastery-based learning. All these approaches allow students to participate in evaluating their own progress. In fact, the more radical approach of ungrading fits very well within the main themes of anarchism. Ungrading is not a static set of practices, but rather it's an ongoing process of engaging students in the grade conversation. For example, collaboratively assigning grades, which encourages metacognition, self-reflection, engagement, and accountability. For example, at the end of the course, students could self-assign their own grades, relying on a self-evaluation framework designed in collaboration with the instructor. In fact, we tried implementing such ideas in large university classes, and it was quite successful. Having no marks throughout the term, with the final grade assignment being done collaboratively with students, drastically changed the learning environment in the classroom. One more step towards challenging hierarchies.
So the third tenet is a focus on diversity and open-endedness. Mathematics education often emphasizes a single correct approach to a problem, and this is unfortunate. It privileges certain types of reasoning and ways of thinking. It marginalizes creative, unconventional, and contextually informed approaches. Moreover, standard course design focuses on specifying learning outcomes. We determine the end point, not the processes. This is certainly not open-ended.
From the point of view of course design, we can think about what open-ended courses may look like. Perhaps we do not specify learning outcomes for a course, but instead ask students to reflect and write the experienced learning outcomes for themselves at the end of the course, which is when learning outcomes really apply. Or perhaps we replace outcomes by learning path, or perhaps we specify outcomes at the beginning of the course, but in collaboration with students. Or, more radically, perhaps we discard outcomes altogether and focus on the process. For instance, we could have courses designed around open questions rather than predefined learning outcomes. A course built around questions such as, is population growth an indicator for inequity? Or what could go wrong with writing a mathematical argument in informal terms? Such courses could focus on the mathematical thinking required to propose answers to these questions. This also embodies the idea of prefigurative politics, where the focus of the course is on the reasoning skills rather than solely on mathematical content. In such a course, students could also select questions that resonate with their own interests or background and explore them collaboratively. This goes in the direction of Paulo Freire's critical pedagogy and libertarian education, in which the classroom should be a space for asking questions.
So this is also where the emotional side of mathematics comes in. When students engage in open-ended exploration, they experience emotions, failure, insight, and discovery. These emotional dimensions, frustration, joy, the aha moment, these are all part of learning, and they contribute to resilience, creativity, and a deeper connection with the subject, and with responsible global citizenship. A broader educational focus on competencies, knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values is supported by contemporary education research and is backed by social and neuroscience, as well as being an enduring principle of Indigenous ways of knowing and being. Encouraging mathematics students to acknowledge and respond to their head and heart in the classroom encourages autonomy of choice and gives them ownership over their own education.
From our point of view, as practicing mathematicians, what we actually do involves a lot of emotional activity. We are asking questions that nobody has asked before, and for which there is no answer yet. Pursuing questions like these has no clear path forward, and often solutions come from unexpected ideas and comments from other people, or who knows where. What if, instead of teaching people already well-known solution path to already solved problems, we encourage students to feel the emotional side of exploring the unknown, the creative act of asking new questions, and pursuing answers that have no pre-designed path? In other words, what if instead of learning how math was done by others, students actually learn how to do math? In the end, this is what we are proposing when we ask our colleagues to consider undergraduate mathematics education from an anarchist perspective.
So here's our takeaway. By applying anarchist principles, we can rethink undergraduate mathematics in ways that promote equity and engagement and a deeper appreciation for the subject.
Resistance to domination, prefigurative politics, diversity, and open-endedness offer concrete entry points, leading to ideas such as dialogue-based classrooms, collaborative decision-making, open-ended problem-solving and course design, a focus on skills rather than content, on grading, and horizontal teaching structures in general. Small changes in curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment can drastically transform hierarchical structures inherent in undergraduate math education.
And ultimately, this is about humanizing mathematics, like making classroom spaces for thinking, exploring, collaborating, and even struggling in ways that reflect the values that we wish to see in the broader world. An anarchist perspective shows that many of the current curricular choices in undergraduate mathematics education do not reflect the values of practicing mathematicians or many values that are held by educators. Resources such as Daniel Reinholz's book offer practical paths forward for addressing hierarchies in the classroom. Our paper skims the surface, and there's certainly room for more insight into curricular change informed by an anarchist perspective.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope this inspires you to think differently about how knowledge, authority, and education play out, not just in university mathematics, but in all areas of learning and life. If you want to know more, feel free to have a look at our paper, which is called An Anarchist Approach to the Undergraduate Mathematics Curriculum. It is freely available on archive.org, which is spelled ARXIV, the preprint repository in which the vast majority of math research papers are freely distributed to all in an anarchist spirit.
And as always, consider how the principles we've discussed today, resistance to domination, prefiguration, diversity, and open-endedness, might ripple outward into the ways we teach, we learn, and the ways that we interact with one another. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. To help others find Anarchist essays, please rate and review us wherever you find your podcasts. And if you're interested in anarchist ideas, why not check out the journal Anarchist Studies? For over 20 years, Anarchist Studies has been publishing original research on the history, theory, and practice of anarchism. For more information, visit www.lwbooks.co.uk/anarchist-studies.